Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Faculty Corner event. I think I've seen most of you in our events before. There are a couple of new faces. If you have not done so already, you can pick up our calendar event schedule for the spring, summer. So this is all the events that we do, and we do something every single week, as most of you know, and then this is our Faculty Corner series. This particular series is led by a student or a postdoc, and in this case we have Dan, who is going to be our moderator, talking to Carrie Ferrario about her journey becoming a faculty member. But before we get started, I just want to thank you guys in advance, because when Maggie sends you guys the survey after the event, please fill that survey out, not only to kind of what you liked and what you didn't like, but what you want to see in the future is something we really take very seriously. And as an example, I think 4 or 5 months ago, a couple of folks who came to one of our events suggested that they wanted to see a panel of new postdocs as to how they made a decision as to where they want to come for a postdoc. And we're doing a panel on postdocs next month. So we do take your feedback quite seriously. So please do give ideas that you think or you and your colleagues may want to hear more from our team on. So that being said, thank you, Carrie and Dan, for being here. Let's get started.
Okay. As Shilda said, my name is Daniel Walensky, and this is Dr. Carrie Ferrario. She's our esteemed guest this week for the faculty seminar here. Carrie went to undergrad at Indiana University in Bloomington, and then she did her PhD right here at University of Michigan in the neuroscience department. Or program, I guess.
Program, yep. In biopsych was the department.
Biopsych. She did her postdoc at Rosalind Franklin University, and I'd never heard of it until Carrie told me about it. And it's just north of Chicago, right? It's a medical center. It's very cool. And then since 2012, she's been on the faculty in the Department of Pharmacology in the medical school here, and just received tenure a few weeks ago, so I think congratulations. As we all know, this is an amazing feat and a really cool thing that we are pretty special to be a part of in the academy. Her lab is working to understand how the neurobiological mechanisms of drug abuse and obesity, and I've had the fortune to get to know Carrie a little bit through the drug abuse training grant, and I was having a conversation with her once about why she's a part of this training grant, because it didn't seem to me from the outside as a postdoc, why would a faculty member want to do this? It's not a ton of work, but it's enough work that it's probably a little bit of a burden. It's not directly related to your research or teaching. Why do you do that? And I asked her this, and she said, basically, I really like mentoring and I like engaging with students and postdocs, and this is really a cool thing that we get to do at a great university like University of Michigan that you can't do everywhere and in every profession. So I think Carrie cares a lot about her trainees, and that I'm sure will come through in our discussion. And so I'll turn it over to Carrie to tell us a little bit about her story. Maybe you want to start there with how you got to this place.
I just have a quick, would you guys speak up a little bit, because the video is not as sensitive to voice. So
okay. I feel like I'm shouting. I'll try to talk louder. Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you guys for coming. This is a nice, lovely, large group. I'm just curious, how many people are graduate students? Graduate students, okay, and how many people are postdocs? Okay, and how many people for the postdocs that are more than 3 years? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Right on.
Right on, okay, yeah, right on. So my hope today is that we'll have a bit of a conversation. So if I say something that's interesting that you want to hear more about, you might raise your hand and be like, what did you mean by that? Or I don't understand that, or explain. That would be great. And one of the things that people asked ahead of time was sort of, did you always want to do this? How did you balance, when you're looking for jobs, what were you thinking? So I went to college not having really any clue about what I wanted to do. I was an English major and a psychology major, My mom thought that I was at college to find a husband. She told me this directly. She's a very frank person. My father said, you're at college to work, right? Not, don't play, work. But that was the sum total of the direction. I think they knew I was kind of smart and I would do all right, but that was really it. They knew I should go to college, but that was it. One should go to college. That's sort of how I ended up starting in New Jersey and going to school in Indiana. I went to Indiana because it was really far away from everybody I knew, and that was something I was looking for in a school, and it was really big. I'd grown up in a pretty small environment. There were 286 people in my graduating high school class. So those were my motivations. And then I needed money for school, just to, a little spending cash and such. And a friend of mine said, hey, you can apply to work in a lab. They have a program for minorities. My mother's side of the family is a mix of Mexicans and Spaniards, and he said they have this initiative and they'll pay you some money to work in a lab. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And I walked into a lab and I was like, holy crap, this is the coolest thing I've seen. I just thought it was really cool. There were a bunch of really smart, really interesting people. They were passionate about what they were doing. The lab I was in was a lab of this guy named Joe Steinmetz. And he was a senior guy. He was well into his gray-haired years by then. And so he would pop into lab once in a while. This is the PI who never touches a rat, right? Just looks at graphs and says, go away. But when
PhD comics.
Yeah, PhD comics sort of, except very jolly and very approachable and always supportive. And we were recording from Purkinje neurons, which are these cells that they make this great pop sound when they fire. And Joe, the PI, would come into lab and we would be recording, we would have the speaker on, and he'd go, pop, 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 oh, I love that sound. That's the best sound ever. And he would get so jazzed. And so that was sort of the environment that I was introduced to science in. And I just thought, how can I stay doing this? And so I sort of made the decision that I wanted to be an academic researcher from there. And at that point, this was Indiana's an R1 research institute, very much like Michigan. There's lots of differences, but very much like Michigan. There was no discussion of wanting to be a teacher. There was no discussion of wanting to teach in classes. That was like, well, yeah, you do that, but we want to do research. We want to play in lab. We want to enjoy ourselves here. And so that's sort of the story that has evolved that I tell. There were some nuances there. I was dating somebody at the time who was applying to grad school that year. He'd already taken a gap year, and I was thinking maybe I should take a gap year or not, but then, well, if we're both going to go, we might as well go. So I don't know if I would have taken a gap year or not, and I don't know what would have happened if I'd taken a gap year. And I decided to apply. I mean, I knew I wanted to pursue a PhD, but I decided to apply that year and to many of the places I applied to, because that's where he was applying to, and we had overlapping interests. So it was a bit of my direction and a bit of his direction. So that's sort of how I started. Does that sound crazy? Familiar? At 18, 19, I decided I wanted to do this. And I just got tenure. And now I'm 39. And I like it.
And so you landed at the University of Michigan.
Yep. For grad school.
For grad school.
Yep. My goal was to get out of the Midwest when I applied to graduate schools. I was an East Coaster. I grew up right outside New York City. That's where I was born and raised. And my goal was to get out of the Midwest. And I applied to graduate programs very broadly. And Indiana, if you guys have ever seen IU, Bloomington's a beautiful campus. They make movies there. It's gorgeous. And they have us interview here when? February, right? And it's warm in southern Indiana. So I remember my visit here going, oh God, it's so cool. And I don't know about this place. And then going back and looking at because I was research focused, I was looking at the people I thought I could work with, the people I thought I could do my PhD with, and looking at the program, and gosh darn it, Michigan was the best fit for me at that time. It really, really was. And I was like, okay, I can do the winters. It'll be okay. So I sort of, I reluctantly and enthusiastically chose Michigan. I enthusiastically chose Michigan for my scientific goals, but sort of reluctantly chose it for sort of my broader personal goals. My family was all in New York and Pennsylvania. Everybody. New York, Pennsylvania, Boston, all in the cities. And so that was something that I was like, well, this is my education. This is really important. I want to get the best education I can get to set myself up for what I want to do next. And so that was how I valued those decisions. And different people value them differently.
And then how did you choose your postdoc lab?
So how did I choose my postdoc lab? So as I developed in my graduate school, so I ended up not doing my thesis with the person whose lab I mostly came here for, because the science is broad. It's so broad and so beautiful, and I had one sort of small experience and thing in mind, and then it was all, wow, there's all of this other stuff. So I worked with Terry Robinson, and I did cocaine self-administration studies. And most of what I did was behavioral, very little in the brain, like, you know, wet lab sort of bench types of mechanistic studies. That's not what the lab did, and I thought I wanted to do that. And I had been reading the literature a lot, and everybody's studying dopamine, which is a major neurotransmitter, and there were a couple of people that were studying this other transmitter, glutamate, and glutamatergic plasticity. And I thought that would be really cool. So I was very science focused. I really wanted to study glutamatergic plasticity, and so I went to the literature really, and I guess we were familiar enough with the field and just said, who are the best people working on that are someplace that I'd be willing to go. And so here's a bit where my, so the story that you say as well, and so I had this logical path, and I chose to work with Dr. Marina Wolf at Rosalind Franklin University because she was really the best fit for my scientific interests. And I think I was very lucky. I didn't have to compromise very much. She was a really good fit for my scientific interests. She's at a small medical school that no one's ever heard of. It is not a research powerhouse. There are a lot of really strong scientists there doing cutting edge work, and they're recognized in their fields, but it's a small private medical school, one of the most expensive medical schools in the US. They have a very strong podiatry program, so totally different, no undergrads. So looking at that school, I was like, I don't know, man, that's really different. Like, there's no undergrads. Like, that's weird. And like, I went to 2 Big Tens, IU gets like it does here on the weekends on football Saturday, right? So I thought, okay, well, that would make me a little nervous, but she was doing the science I really wanted to do. I went to her lab to learn how to do cell culture from primary neurons, totally different from behavior, and I'd had this idea in my mind that I was going to learn how to do cell culture and live cell imaging with antibody-based approaches and biochemistry to measure glutamate receptors, and then I was going to bring that into studying dopamine, which works through G protein coupled receptors. Many of you guys who study GPCRs, that's a really naive thing to think, because you cannot use basic protein biochemistry like off the shelf to study GPCRs. So there's this good scientific mesh, but I also had a different partner at that time who was in Ann Arbor and was staying here. And so I didn't know, did I want to go really far? Did I not want to go far? So I was looking also within a constrained region. So I wanted to I didn't want to go all the way to the West Coast, because I thought that might make my life really, really challenging. And so she was also closer. She was in Chicago. And so, my worries about the school, I was like, well, my postdoc training is really about the person I'm working with and what I produce in that lab, because my main goal was to get a tenure track position. So I ended up with Marina, and it was one of the best choices I've ever made. She's a phenomenal mentor. She's your dream mentor, and a powerhouse researcher, just absolutely powerhouse.
So a really great question somebody asked was, who are your career mentors? And obviously she was, and who else did you find to be really important in your formation?
So
both in terms of your training, but also currently, like as a PI.
Yeah. So it changes a lot over time, and it's gotten a lot broader. So like earlier on, it was mostly my peers, all of us trading information about what we'd learned. My like kind of near peers, so the postdocs in the lab when I was a graduate student. So Gabby Britton is a professor at the kind of NIH equivalent in Panama now. She was a postdoc and grad student when I was an undergraduate. And she read my essays for getting into grad school, and she's the one who said, "Oh no, you don't want to go work with that person. They're not very nice. You want to go. How about that other person?" And she is still a very close friend. I see her every year at SFN whenever we both go, and she's always a sounding board and a cheerleader. She's always encouraging me. Marina is one of those people who when you work hard and you're really invested in the science, then she wants to help you succeed. If you want to do something else, she's also willing to help you, but that's not as much her sphere. She just has much more connections the other way. So she's been just amazing as I've sort of gone up through the ranks. One thing, somebody asked like what was unexpected or like surprising to you about this transition. I didn't expect people to help as much as they do. No one can help you think about what your question is or what your hypothesis is really, like what you're really passionate about, right? So everybody has the thing they're excited about and they want to think about their science, right? You're like, oh sure, let me stop thinking about my cool project and think about your project for a couple hours, right? So, but they will really help you with the generalizable broad things, reading proposals, or I have this situation in lab, I'm not sure what to do, and that's been really helpful, and there have just been so many people within my department that have just been, friendly, nice people. So I would say that's still under this very broad umbrella of mentors. Not every mentor is a confidant, and a true friend or something. Sometimes it's just somebody that's a sounding board. Say, I was thinking about doing this. What do you think? And so I've been, gotten just a ton of help from the people around me very broadly. That has been really valuable, sort of once you're steering your own ship. Because now you get to do it the way you want, You get to label stuff the way you want, organize the freezer the way you want. Like the thing that always annoyed you about people, I don't want anybody sharing reagents, or no, you should all share, make stuff, right? Whatever it is, you get to do that, and nobody can really tell you how you want to run your lab, right?
Does anyone have questions sort of around this topic of Carrie's story?
Can you talk about what the transition from postdoc to faculty was like, and how you identified job openings, and how you knew in your postdoc that you were ready to start applying?
Okay. And so nuts and bolts of transition. So how did I know I was ready? The funding for my postdoc position ran out. And so, it's like I need to find a next job. Right? So you get sort of this transition, this funny transition from student. As a grad student, you're still student. You're still taking class. You're still a student. The postdoc, that's this kind of funnier middle ground, right? Where you have some autonomy and more knowledge, and then you're in charge of making sure you have a job, right? So so towards the end of my it was technically my third postdoc. So my second postdoc, I was brought on. There was funding. And then it was clear that the renewal of that funding was not going to happen. And my PI did a really nice thing. She said, you should move on because it would be better for you and your career if you move on to another lab. It would have been good for her lab if I had stayed, because I could have helped get those projects back up and going. But she was like, that's not worth it in the long run. Like, that's too big a gamble. You should move to another lab. So I did. I moved to another lab. And that lab was also in a transition for their funding. And so, well, everybody's always in transition to funding, right? But it was fine. So I had a lot of skills. They brought me on because I knew how to do this cell culture work that I'd learned as a postdoc. And then, I've been postdocing for about 5 years. And, I was getting antsy. I wanted to move on, not be a postdoc anymore. There was the funding. I wasn't exactly sure if I had a job, right? And I needed a job for money and stuff. So I
eating is nice.
Well, sometimes, as long as it's healthy. But so I sort of saw my peers around me. This is the transition time, and so I started looking for open positions and just web-based searches, identifying places and universities that were strong in areas of my research interest, that were in places I thought would be a nice place to live. I mean, just going to the website and poking around. I also emailed a couple people that I knew, like contacts of contacts, just to say, hey, do you know if you will be hiring anytime soon? I'm really interested. And that was an email I took time with. It was a first contact email, but people are going to judge you based on that, for the professionalism of that email. So I didn't just do it flippantly, but I contacted people directly, and I looked at all of the job websites in the Nature and Science have job postings, the major societies have job postings. So sort of did all of that stuff. And there were not a ton of jobs. I did not get a K99 R00. Grants were in renewal. That was a stated reason. It's not clear that the support is there. And so, because if there's not money to do the research, then it's pretty hard to say you're going to do the research. So it's a practical sort of thing. But so I also started putting together a resume for the first time in my life, like an actual resume for a job, where they don't assign you a mentor. You're hired to do a job for a company of some kind. I had some vague idea that there were things like that existed that other people were doing. I was really very focused on being an academic, but I realized, oh shit, I might not get that job. There's not a lot of them. I want it. I've worked really hard. I've checked as many of the boxes as I can check. I applied for the Ks. I had an NRSA and all that good stuff. I had lots of publications. But no Nature papers. I was like, oh, I don't know. Well, we'll see. And so I I did a self-eval, and I said, okay, I think I can get this job, but I don't know that I will. So it's time for me to also start thinking about other things. And so I went to, in Ann Arbor, we have a couple different groups that interface with biotech and industry that hold lots of forums that are just basically little job fairs, meet and greets. And of course, Bio Arbor is one of them. There's a lot of meet spaces. So I started going to those sorts of things. And I will tell you, for me, I was like, okay, that wasn't really what I wanted to do. Like, I didn't see anything that got me as excited as this job. But there were some cool people. There were some interesting things. There were some things where I sort of started seeing, okay, I think I could do something like that. Like, I could see myself doing that. It wasn't about, like, can I do it? It was, like, just imagining myself doing that from day to day when I'd been in a lab doing this for so long. And so it was a really good exercise. It sort of made me think about, well, what else could I do? I talked to Boston Consulting Group, talked to friends who had worked for Boston Consulting Group. What was that like? So I just did a bunch of information gathering and started putting out feelers and putting together materials. Yeah.
So what makes someone a great postdoc mentor?
So he asked, what makes somebody a great postdoc mentor? Well, so lots of things. I think it depends on what somebody needs. So for me, what made Marina a really great postdoc mentor was that she inspired me to try to think of the best thing to do, the best question, or the best way to answer it. So her approach to science was just very compelling. She didn't say, well, our lab does this. We use these techniques. What question can we ask? She was always saying, well, here's what we found. What do we need to do next? Oh, we need to learn how to use this other approach we've never learned before. Great, let's do that. Let's figure out who's the best at that. Okay, cool, let's email them. Or let's email their postdoc and ask them how to do that, right? So for me, she was a really good mentor in that she really encouraged me to pursue the science and to think about what the question was and how to frame it. She was also a really good mentor because she had this wonderful attitude. She assumed that every day when everybody walked in, they were doing the best they could do. And some people's best wasn't as good as other people's best, but that was okay. That meant that you tailored the projects to that person, and maybe that person wasn't going to be around as long as somebody else if they really weren't, they really weren't interested or really weren't, I don't know, doing it. Does that make sense? I don't know how, it's not a very articulate way to say it, but and I think that was sort of a good thing because it helps people find what they are interested in. Because this is really hard, right? It's really, really hard. And it's really exciting, but sometimes it's just not fun at all, right? And so if it's going to be really not fun at all, then you kind of have to have some kernel in there that you really like. And some of those pieces can be the people you work with or the training you're doing, the interactions, or just the discovery, the science. Getting something to work sometimes is just the excitement. Things that she did not do that we talk about a lot that people think, say they look for in mentors. I mean, she didn't really say like, let's go, like you should go talk to so-and-so about industry or something, or, really get involved in like my personal life or like helping me with sort of those types of things. But she was the chair of the department. She was a director of a couple of different, outside societies and groups. She was super busy. So she was very focused on the science and doing that. She was really good at introducing us to people at conferences and things like that. But sort of, I don't know, other sorts of broader things, that just wasn't her bag. But I had other people that I knew, mostly postdocs, who would sort of help with some of that type of stuff. So I think it's really hard for one person to sort of have all of that. The last thing, and this was something people also asked about, sort of the The postdoc time is weird, right? Because there's sort of your personal goals and you need to become independent. And then there's your PI's goals, which are to help you become a better scientist, at least should be. I think that's a quality of a good mentor. But their goal is also to make sure that their lab is a success, right? And you're one of the pieces to that success. And at some point, like, you start grading on each other a bit, you know? That's natural. And one thing she was really good about was just talking very openly about that. Like, listen, I know that, like, so there was a project, I had been working on this thing for 2 years. We discovered that one thing we'd been doing, this biochemical assay, really wasn't the right way to do it, the best way to do it. And she was like, we have to do the whole thing again. And I was trying to finish up and move on. And, you know, she was like, no, we have to do the whole thing again. And I was like, okay. I was not happy about that. She knew, you know, she knew I wasn't happy about that. And she was like, but we're going to get Mike, who is, you know, this wonderful senior technician who'd been in the lab for her. So we're going to get Mike to help you. You know, so she recognized my struggle. She addressed it in a practical manner that supported me while also supporting the goal of the lab, which was, you know, finish out this piece of data that we'd spent lots and lots of time and energy and money on that was critical for being able to publish the paper, right? And so to me, that was a really good lesson in how to be a good mentor, but also, you know, that natural sort of rubbing that you do sometimes where that's what the lab needed and that was the right thing to do. And it, you know, we redid all of it and put it in the paper. And, you know, I can feel confident that the science was done well, but that sort of natural grading, I think, is something that happens, and she just addressed it directly. So, like, sometimes, you know, in the perfect world, your goals align really well with the mentor's goals, and in, like, the worst case scenario, they're not aligned at all, right? So, like, you know, you just want to come in and learn a technique, and you have a different type of goal in mind and job in mind where you don't think it's very important for you to publish a paper, and, you know, so you just really want to learn how this technique works, get that line on your CV, get a letter from somebody, and get on to your next job. That's really challenging for a PI to deal with if I put on my PI hat. I totally understand how that facilitates that person, but that does not help the lab. That does not help the NIH mission, right? So you have to sort of come in the middle, and I think talking about that openly and saying, like, well, okay, I see what you need, but this is sort of what I was hoping to get out of this. If you can have that type of communication, I think it can be really good.
So there's certainly a balance between needs as a postdoc and needs as a PI, running a lab, and all those other demands on your time and your funding. So besides your personal experience being in as the mentee, how did you learn to mentor your students, and have you dealt with these same kinds of challenges as the other person, as the mentor?
Yeah, certainly. So he was asking, how do you learn to mentor? I mean, trial and error. I'm not kidding, but everybody's different, you know? So you sort of, one of the things people said to me is, don't assume that everybody will be like you were when you were in school. And I think that I have seen, like, you know, lots of people come up through the ranks around me. That's really true. And it's not like a better or worse thing. It's not like they're trying to say, like, oh, you're driven and, like, people won't be like that. No, it's just more like your style and what motivates you. Like, some people just get motivated by teaching others in the lab, and some people get motivated by tangibles, like getting that paper published, or I like gold stars. I was one of those kids in the, you know, elementary school where they put the gold stars. I like gold stars. I know that they don't mean anything really, but I still like them. So,
but it's affirmation.
It's affirmation. So I like a little affirmation. It doesn't have to be a lot, but a little. And so some people, like when you're doing your, you know, your mentoring style, some people just really need to hear once in a while or often, you're doing well. Like, you're doing the right thing. Some people are like, I know I'm doing the right thing. What's wrong with you? Why are you talking to me? And they just want to know, like, you know, because you did this, you get this reward. You know, like, here, I'm sending you to this conference, or I don't know.
So what I'm hearing is
tangibles.
Part of your mentoring style and part of motivating your people to do is understanding how they're motivated and trying to look at it from their perspective and figure them out a little bit.
Yeah, and trying not to, I mean, you know, I'm still pretty close, but I'm getting farther and farther away. Like, trying to remember what was it that I was thinking and feeling, right? You know, like, what was that experience like? And you're like, oh yeah, I remember this. Like, okay, yeah, you know. It comes through with teaching too. Like, the students are just merciless, man. They, you know, they don't imagine that you're a person with feelings sometimes that might be tired, you know. They just want to point on something or what, you know. So And then you're like, man, where is that coming from? You're like, oh yeah, I kind of remember. Do you remember? If it wasn't you, it was one of your friends who was always going to office hours asking for a point, right? And you're just sitting there with the student and you're thinking, I'm going to spend an hour talking to you about this class thing, and I really want to work on my paper, or I really want to go, see what's going on in lab or something. So, but trying to remember that, keeping that in mind, what your experiences were like, I think is really important. And I think it does take an incredible amount of energy on your part, and that was something, I was like, what are the surprising things? That was really surprising to me, like how much energy it takes. And sometimes it's too much. Like sometimes it's, sometimes you're like, I cannot, I've had a really rough week, don't have the energy to really bring this person up right now. So you try to make sure that it's not just you, that they have peer mentors, you have other mentors, because once you have 10 people in your lab, that's a lot, and it's asking a lot, right? And you ask well, how do you balance your work-life stuff? Imagine, people have undergrads that you work with, undergrads and grad students in your lab, right? Imagine all of them just losing it finals week and coming to you every 10 minutes, right? It's really, and you want to be a good person and you want to help them, you care about them, you like them, they've been working with you in lab, but sometimes you're like, oh my God, but my life is, I got stuff going on right now, guys. So that's sort of the balance too, I think. It sounds really nice to say yeah, I tailor and I work really hard, and I do, but I also sort of keep in mind what I'm capable of at that time, and that, that shifts. It shifts with the stresses and the demands of different people. Yeah.
So kind of on the same theme, how do you choose or interview, do you have any insights from interviewing people? How do you choose the right people for your lab or the best?
That one is also, I hope I get better and better at that. I think, predicting the future is a really, really hard thing. I think that there are some things that are good indicators, and it also depends on what your goals are for that person. So sometimes you have a very specific project that, for the overview of the lab, okay, we really need to get this thing done. And so maybe somebody has a skill set where they can already come in to learn that more quickly, and you see that they can move that forward. So sometimes you do that with postdocs. In some other choices, I've hired people just because they have a background in a certain area. And I realized that, a lot of the papers I'm reading and a lot of the directions that some of these projects are going are more in that area. So they might not have a specific tangible skill, but they have a broad-based knowledge. And that's true for graduate students too. And I think it differs at the graduate and the postdoc level, right? The graduate students, you're coming in, you're training. You're not expected to know what you're doing in terms of a specific technique or in the field, whereas a postdoc you are. And so to me, I just try to pick people that seem invested and have at least a general goal. And not that they're invested that they're going to be an academic, but that they are invested in what we're doing in the lab and that role that they would be taking on in the lab, that it matters to them. And I think also that I can work with that person. Some personalities or just something just might not work. You might just get you have to spend a lot of time with people. And if right off the bat you're I do not see myself sitting, having an hour-long meeting with this person once a month, once a week, right? Think about that also matters, because it matters for them too. It sounds like you want them to be happy. It should be a nice atmosphere and symbiotic interaction where people at least feel comfortable discussing. So those are some of the things I look for, but it's so hard to know.
So you said that you didn't have a K99 or R00 transition award, so how did you secure your first funding for your lab?
So she's asking how to secure the first funding without having those. I just wrote R01s. I just submitted R01s to NIH until I got one.
How long did that take?
Yeah. So how long did it take? So one thing that I will say, a very wise man, Dr. Paul Phillips, told me, was to keep in mind that everybody has only done this once, right? At every step, when you get your first job, or when you take your first postdoc, or when you get your first, everybody's only done it once, and you don't exactly know what it was that worked about what you did. right? You're, oh, I'm convinced it was because I talked to that person and they were at that school and they must have done something. You don't know, right? You're just making up stuff. So, yeah, that's true. So, so what my thought process was that, I knew what startup money I had. I came in with a pretty specific plan in mind of just what the question was we were asking, what some of the key things we wanted to establish were, whether or not, is X or Y true or not, and what techniques and approaches we were going to use to do that. So my goal when I walked into my lab was to get my bread and butter things, the things I knew best, up and running as fast as possible. I knew I needed preliminary data. Okay, we need to show that we can do A, B, and C. I need to at least be able to show I can do that. So, okay, let's get that. And if I can show there's an effect, like my primary hypothesis, there's some evidence for it, let's try to do that. So I sort of grouped everything by experiments and said, okay, that's what I want. I want to get the data that just shows I can at least do the technique, so I can put that in my proposal, and preliminary data that says that what I'm saying we should study, there's something to study there. And that hopefully that will be the first paper. So papers beget grants. If you get papers, you're much more likely to get grants. If you have no papers, you're not very likely to get grants. So I thought, well, you can control papers. So one of the other things that I think was really valuable was recognizing, and Marina really did, she did teach me this, not directly, but indirectly. There's things you can control. You can control when you split your cells and run that key control, right? You can control whether or not you write up the introduction of that manuscript, right? Papers and your individual scientific chunks are like almost entirely, as much as anything can be, in your control. They might not work, you might have failures, right? But you can produce a paper. Whereas grants, you can produce the most beautiful, perfect grant ever and nobody likes it. Or, you know that this is the coolest thing and this is gonna be the next generation stuff and nobody wants to give you money for it, right? So that makes it really, really hard and frustrating. But so I sort of thought about these two things. What can I control mostly and what do I have only so much control over? And so papers, I had an idea, get this paper. These are going to be the chunks that are going to support the things I want to say in my grant, that we should study A, B, and C, and that I can do it. And then I think I submitted a grant towards the end of my first year or something like that. I submitted iterations of that grant. It got scored every time. So it got scored the first time I sent it in, revised it, got a slightly worse score after doing that. Revised it, sent it in, different grant, we'd made progress, we'd published some papers, well, 1 or 2 papers on it, revised it, sent it in, got a decent score. I mean, every time I got a decent score, it was close to the pay line. It was in the 20s or something. No, it was went from in the 20s, and then I sent it in, and it went down to 40 something. Just not even near the pay line. And I thought 2 things. I thought, well, that sucks. And then I thought, I might need to start putting together something very different. So once it was the 3rd time around, I put together a second grant, second proposal that was related to studying obesity, but was on a very different topic. It was looking at insulin and what does insulin do in the brain. So the first thing was all about how does obesity change brain function and behavior. And I had been reading about insulin and had these other projects in mind, and I thought, okay, I need to do a second thing. So knowing when it's time to try to do something else is probably a good idea. I don't know, that's what I did. It seemed to have worked. So I started this sort of second line of things, and we had enough data in the lab that I could support that, because it was small stuff, so I picked what can I accomplish. And then even though it was 45, Marina, who had read my grants and given me feedback, she really, actually really read my grants and gave me real feedback. She's the only person who actually gave me feedback on my experiments. I don't think this is a really good control. She's the only person that's done that, and I think she's unusual. Everybody else read it for clarity, understanding, and that was super helpful, and I think that's more normal. I think she's just an amazing superhero person. So she said, just send it back in, because it's a renewal. Don't, a revision rather, don't miss that opportunity. I sent it back in and it got a 12th or 13th percentile. So it's the opinion of 3 very tired, well-meaning, informed people, right? So that got funded. And so then that was, by my second, third year, because I was just putting them in every cycle. And so I also think perseverance counts, you know. And then the second one, since I'd written it and it got scored, and so then I said, well, not abandon that, because I got really excited about the insulin work, and so that's sort of how things ended up sort of progressing. But you just kind of, it's one of those things, you just got to do it, and you know, get opinions and get input as much as you can, get examples if you work well that way, go to workshops if you want, you know, if that works well for your style where they're making you write stuff. Do those things. Do any of the things that you think might help you. And then if something isn't working for you, don't do that. Do something, try something else. It's experimenting. It's a lot of experimenting.
When you were applying for jobs, were you constrained by region?
I was and I wasn't. So my husband is also an academic, and so we started applying broadly, and we did not think we would necessarily be able to stay at Michigan. I'm really happy to be at Michigan. Michigan is a place that I think I would have, just with the environment and my particular research area, this would have been a good place for me with coming from outside or being inside. And so he and I were looking on the job market together, and I was fortunate that he's ahead of me and established. So it was still rough, but a lot of universities are very aware of two-body problems. This is not uncommon. That's why there's a term, two-body problem. And actually one of the students who was a graduate student a few years behind me, who's now a postdoc, she and her partner met when they were grad students. They both just landed a job at Virginia, Virginia Tech, I think. Well, each landed a job. And it was one of the scenarios where she had applied to a job there. There was not a job posted in his area, but they were very excited about her, and she said, well, I have a partner, and they said, oh, well, actually, they were planning on posting a job in a year or two, but maybe we could expedite that, because he was also doing very well. So there's a lot of those types of conversations that happen in the hiring process, but usually it happens once you sort of know a place is really interested in you. And usually if you have kind of equivalent, you have two really great scientists here, there's a lot that larger universities especially can do. We have an office here that deals with that. That's how common it is. So I think you shouldn't despair. And I know a lot of people get really worried. You should, I think, just kind of keep putting one foot in front of the other and see what happens next.
Do you, so I guess like a two-part question. Do you think there are any like innate qualities of you as a person and any like skills that you built up over time that made your application competitive? I know you just said like people only do things one time.
Yeah, I know. So having seen a lot of people interview now, because the department I'm in, pharmacology, has just hired, I think, 5 new tenure track professors in the last year.
Have you been on any of those search committees?
I haven't been on the search committee, but we all go to the talks, and then we have meetings and we participate in the broad discussion. The things that are most compelling are when the person can convey their science succinctly and clearly when in their oral presentations. So really cultivating those skills, I think is something that's helpful. I enjoy giving talks and things like that. I put a lot of time and effort into organizing them. And when I watch somebody's talk and I think that was a really good talk, I take a few minutes to think about why was that such a good talk? And when it's a bad talk, you're like, why didn't that work? Right? What was bad about that? So I think cultivating your presentation and speaking skills is generally useful. Also, when we sort of hire, we think about, well, can this person teach? And this is a research, institute, so we don't have them. So if you go for interviews at a primary teaching school, they may ask you to actually teach. I had a friend who was asked to teach to all of the PIs. So the department showed up and they said, just do a lecture on, as though this was a physiology 101 class and you're teaching on X. And they told him this, 3 weeks before, and present to the faculty as though they were the students. So that's like a trial by fire, sort of. And then that's very common, though. And if that's a standard thing to do if you're applying to a school that's more teaching focused and more like liberal arts college sort of school. And we don't do that at U of M. What we do is people give a chalk talk where they just outline the grant. So what's the hypothesis and what do your experiments look like? And there's a lot of teaching in that, right? Because you guys don't know about anything I studied. We're new faculty, I have no idea what you guys know, right? And it's a bunch of strangers in the room. So that's how we sort of evaluate the teaching. Like, can we imagine this person teaching? Could they really distill their, really complex signaling pathway that has thousands of moving parts into something clear that had takeaway messages? So I think those skills were actually pretty useful. I think writing is also really useful. Do you guys or have people said that you write a lot if you end up being in? Yeah, you write a lot even if you are like my colleagues who are at pharmaceuticals, my colleagues who are like in the NIH directors' offices and things like that. They also write a ton. Writing is really important. It's how we communicate with each other when we're not like face to face, right? And so much of that communication happens not face to face. So figuring out a way to cultivate your own writing skills and figuring out a style that works for you. Like, some people really hate writing. I don't, but some people really do. So if you're one of those people where writing is like pulling teeth for you, you got to figure out something that helps you get through it, whatever it is.
When you say writing, like, are you talking about grant writing, like papers and stuff like that?
Papers, grants, letters of recommendation, all of the material that you see coming out of NIH, right? All of those announcements, all of those, if you go to the NIH's website, which I never did when I was a grad student or postdoc, why would you do that? If you go to their website, they have a ton of public outreach information. NIH has, and they employ scientists to do this, to inform the public about our policies, to inform the public how we're using their tax dollars to better their health, to provide resources. So if you go look up the opioid epidemic website that they have up, it's phenomenal. It has so much information and resources that's taken from the basic sciences and the clinical sciences and then translated in writing to, your grandma and your cousin who want to, write a book report for their class, right? So you're writing all the time, internal memos. I just had to write my faculty progress report. That's not that fun. What have you done to better the mission of education, teaching, research at U of M this year? So you have to write something. So like lots and lots of different sorts of writing, not just writing a paper. I don't think I really realized how much other forms of writing you end up doing. Emails.
And then like innate stuff, like of you as a person.
I'm fairly outgoing. That's probably not a bad thing sometimes, but I certainly have very successful colleagues who are shy. I am opinionated and driven. The reason I like this job is that, I have questions I want to know the answers to, right? There's a thing I'm really excited about, and it's a broad thing, and it's sort of become smaller things that are more manageable. But so I think I like that role, that I get to decide what's interesting and try to move that forward. And I certainly include my students and my postdocs in developing those ideas. Like I think the best scenario is that we start with something that I'm really excited about and they discover something new within that and it branches, right? So that to me is what's cool about science. And so I think just I'm focused on those things and I have a kind of clear idea about the way I want some of the things to run. And I think that sort of helps. And yeah, sometimes somebody might not like that. That's okay, they don't have to work in my lab. I can work at somebody else's lab. Yeah, it's sort of hard to know sort of why it works and not, and that's sort of a different thing. Like every lab environment is a bit different. People run their labs different. I mean, I've been in lab meetings, I guess I've worked in I've spent time in about 6 or 8 different labs at 4 different universities. That was real time. And people, some people run their lab meetings like it's a business meeting. Like you come in and you give your report on the progress so that the boss can make some decisions and they're going to tell you what to do next. And some people run their lab meetings more like a casual discussion where you're really going to all sit down and everybody's going to chime in on what they think might be a cool thing to do next or how to design the experiment, right? Some people don't have lab meetings at all, right? They just sort of communicate via email. So, yeah, it varies a lot.
I have several questions. So are you currently, the time that you spend teaching versus research versus writing, when you first started as a faculty versus you are now, how has it changed?
So the way in which like my time allocation has changed. So when I first started, they handed me an empty space and said, here, make this a lab. Hire some people, right? And that's really exciting and kind of scary, right? You're like, okay, you have to buy all the stuff, right? And so it's changed a ton, and mostly it's grown. Most places, I think, well, most research places that look like Michigan, they will give you a year off of teaching. They say you're not going to teach your first year, or maybe you'll teach one thing your second year. At other places, well, here at U of M also, in LS&A, which is the undergraduate campus, you know, they usually give people the first year off, but their load is, I think, 2 and 1. So you teach 2 full classes in the fall term and 1 full class in the winter term, and then you're also expected that you'll probably run a journal club or something. So it really varies wildly depending on the university you're at. Friends of mine who got teaching at liberal arts schools, they were hired to start in, you're hired now to start this coming semester. Your semester starts in August. You start teaching. You teach 2 full classes. So it really just depends. But in this space here, officially I was not teaching my first year. I was asked to sit in on an 8-week lecture that met 2 times a week to observe my senior faculty colleagues teach that class with the idea that I would teach it in future. So I did that. That took a big chunk of my time. I also did all the grading for that. Which was not, I didn't mind, but I was like, why am I? And it was valuable learning experience, so I sat and did that. And then every year they sort of have added teaching on. And I teach in the medical school, so that's not the kind of teaching I ever imagined I would do. So when I started off with my idea of being a professor and having the lab and teaching the students, I was sort of imagining teaching undergrads in a class of my design where I tell them how cool the brain is. And the first things I taught as a assistant professor were non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs to the pharmacy students, which is a very different group of people to teach to. They have very different goals. I think it's really useful if you can identify what the goals are of your audience and then what your own personal goals are for being satisfied, not sad and angry about things, and try to find the middle ground. Their goals were to not come to class unless necessary. And because they have a ton of class, these are professionals, they're paying to go to school, most of them are working full-time jobs on top of coming to this class. So it's actually not a crazy thing that they would prefer to watch the lecture and be told, so it's a very just different teaching style than undergrads where I expect them to come to class. I think it's crazy not to come to class. People don't, but I think it's crazy not to go to class. You get to talk to people and learn stuff, but they're not supposed to have other things they're doing. They're supposed to be focused on school. That's not always the case, right? We know that, and everybody has that luxury or that freedom to do that. So it's grown over time. I started off with me and a really awesome technician and 1 student. Now I have 2 postdocs, like one's on her way, and 2 students and a technician, and I'm balancing a bunch of different projects, like Daniel said. I've got the 2 primary projects in my lab and another collaboration with another person in another space. I've got a collaboration with another person at another university, all by my own choice. So you can build things up as much as you want. And I am getting to the point now where I'm going, I think I'm full. Like, this is what there's only so much each person can manage. So now I'm spending a ton of my time writing because one of my students just defended. So we're trying to get all of her papers out the door. And next, I have to put in my grant in October, so I know what I'm going to be doing in July and August and September. Does that help?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
The reason I asked is because when I'm putting myself in the shoes of an assistant professor. Like, not many postdocs are gonna want to, they're not gonna apply because you're also a starting faculty. So how do you overcome that challenge?
Actually,
a technician.
I was really surprised. That was another surprise. People want to work with junior PIs. That's great. I think it's because you're in the lab, you're working with people side by side. That's really novel and interesting, and I do think it has a different value of education to the trainee when you're doing it that way versus, the PhD comic PI. So I was surprised that people did want to work in the lab. I had a postdoc, my first my first year, like towards the end of my first year, I got a postdoc, and then a second one joined. So I've always had a postdoc in my lab, and mostly it was because they wanted to be at Michigan. So some of them were following a spouse, or they were, most of them were following spouses, or they wanted to come back home. So they had gone out and done their PhDs at other places, and they wanted to be in the area. And there are actually probably, it's not easy to find a postdoc. I think when you come from the labs in Michigan are strong, right? My sense is not that, I've never seen somebody from here have a hard time finding a postdoc position. It might not be in exactly the place you were hoping, it might not be with exactly the person you're hoping for, but people are very able to find positions, and likewise, people really want to come to Michigan. So I wouldn't sell yourself short and say, oh, there's no way I'm getting a postdoc. You really just might, and so I sort of did see who I had and just made decisions about what was the best thing to get that person to do. Like there's certain things you would expect a postdoctoral to do that you wouldn't necessarily expect a first-year grad student to do.
You would also have to think about your budget, like your grant money too, because you need
your startup money.
Yeah.
I just started focused on. I took it one small chunk at a time. If you think about, I feel like if you think about all of it, it just sounds so overwhelming, and so much. So like, I never really thought about the step I was doing right now. When I was an undergrad, I said, okay, write applications to become a grad student, right? Choose a lab. When I was a grad student, I said, do things to finish PhD, right? That was my goal, was to get my PhD and do well. Okay, now I'm getting to the end, get postdoc. I never thought about, I knew I wanted to be a professor, but I didn't that arc is way too long. 18 to, when did I start? Started 6 years ago, it took 15 years. So that arc's way too long. You can't predict that arc, and things change, right? Your circumstances change, your life changes. So you have to sort of make decisions. So I just sort of tried to chunk it and say, okay, what data do I need to support this proposal? That's all I worried about. I didn't worry about whether or not I would get the money, because it didn't matter. That worry's not going to matter, right? I don't know if I'll get the money or not, but I can control writing a really good experiment and writing my proposal. And so that, for me, sort of kept me from, you don't want to get lost in the sea. The sea is very, very big.
That might be a good place to leave it. We're running short on time. I apologize to those of you that didn't get to your questions. Lots of really good questions, I think, good discussion. Is there any one last burning question that somebody wants to ask? We have a burning question.
That was it.
We have 30 seconds.
I imagine that the first several years of your faculty could be very stressful, and you put in 110% of your effort into that. And so how do you manage your personal life, as a woman and family and children and all that?
Yeah, so my husband's very good at being like, you should really stop working right now. That's a good idea, and he's always right. So mostly, so I did make sure that there are a few things that are mine that I really like. So I know I feel better if I exercise. At this point, it's so much time and energy. I'm not doing a good job. But early on, I was doing a better job. So I really did. I just set some boundaries, and I just said, I'm gonna go to these 2 or 3 gym classes I really like. They're at 6:30, and I'm leaving to do that. And you have to do that for yourself. You just have to set your time aside. If it's your family that you want to be home for or whatever. And yeah, that meant sometimes I did that, and then I did more work in the evening. Or I got up extra early the next day or something. But just having that little breathing space, I think, is really, really important. I also play music. I've made time for music. And oftentimes I'm going to a rehearsal, and I think to myself, oh my God, I have so many things to do. I really shouldn't be going to rehearsal. Oh man. But I always feel better when I go. And when I go and I engage and I do something, I feel refreshed. And that's actually what I feel like too when I go to the BDA, the training grant. I get to hear about the postdocs doing their cool work and sort of remember why you're doing this, right? I didn't become a scientist to write grants. I didn't become a scientist to make gobs of money from my lab. I became a scientist because I wanted to know stuff and play with cool things and think big thoughts and try to do something useful, right? So I think that sort of that little downtime does help. Of course, you have to do all those other things, but but you have to just do the boundary.
Let's thank Carrie for see See you at the next faculty corner.
Thank you both.